From the News Channel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
As Nashville approaches the final end of 2021, how did we do this year in terms of our jobs and economy? Have we been successes? What have been the challenges? What's the outlook for 2022? How have we handled the pandemic, and how will that continue or change as we enter a new year? Nobody can speak to those questions better than Ralph Schulz. He's the president and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. We're happy to have Ralph back as our guest this week on Inside Politics. Ralph, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here. Love the show. Glad to be on it.
Thank you. Looking back a year ago, what were the expectations? I mean, 2020 was a very tough year. And at the time, when you're making expectations at the end of 2020 into 21, nobody knew what was going to happen. The vaccines had not started out. That nobody knew when the rollouts were going to start with the shots. So that made making the projections for 2021 pretty bad, pretty hard.
Well, it made it more difficult, but fortunately we have a network in Nashville of all of the experts that we need to be able to talk to, and we have modeling devices that, starting in March of 2020, we were modeling what the impact of the quarantine might have. If you remember, the economy as we knew it in Tennessee pretty much shut down for a month right there at the beginning of the pandemic. But we were able to do some modeling, and honestly, Pat, a lot of the projections we made at that point in time have borne out, have been very accurate. We expected an economic recovery in Nashville by the second quarter of 2021, and that's pretty much when the economic recovery materialized. We're only about 10,000 jobs away from the job level we were at in February of 2020, and most of that's concentrated in the hospitality industry. So, our predictions of recovery were pretty good. Pretty accurate, but there have been a lot of challenges, hurdles to clear to get there.
So what are those challenges that remain? What parts of the economy were surprising or disappointing to you?
Well, I don't think there's any surprise. The hospitality category hasn't returned to its full level yet. When you see business travel returning, when you see convention travel reaching its potential again, you'll know that the recovery is full. But probably the single biggest challenge for a lot of businesses right now is available workforce. There are jobs out there to be filled that there aren't people to fill.
So why are people going back to work? Is it a concern about being still exposed to the virus if they're in the workplace? Is it low pay? What is it?
I think first of all, there is a lot of competition in wage space, and I think, people are looking to return to the workforce when they can get the best deal on compensation. I also think, what we've seen is a more rapid retirement of the boomer generation. We've seen early retirements of others, which, by the way, is not unusual in downturns and circumstances like this. When people go through the struggle with their business during that downturn or that challenge, they have a tendency to pre-retire or early retire and retire early. But there was a large population of the boomer generation that was working longer that finally said, we're not going to stick with it. You combine that with the fact that for 20 years the birth rate has been reduced in the country, and you see the people leaving the workforce aren't being replaced by the people that have risen to that.
Does Nashville suffer from what's called the Great Resignation? People who had jobs and left their jobs and maybe haven't gone back or have gone someplace else. There's a lot of talk about that, at least nationally.
I think when we see the data, and a lot of that data isn't available yet, we're going to see that our economy has been participating in that move. But anecdotally, and as we have access to labor force figures, we do see that boomer generation and even a younger part of the workforce that is saying we're going to retire. But again, a lot of people, they'll exit the workforce for a while, and then they'll reconsider and they'll come back in different jobs.
So do you expect the Great Resignation at what level it's going is going to get better in 2022 or get worse?
I think it's going to get better. I think you're going to see some people that have left jobs come back, but probably in different jobs. I mean, when you look at healthcare workers, teachers, occupations that went through a lot of stress during COVID.
And still are.
and still are. They may take a breather, but they may come back in different professions.
What parts of the Nashville economy are particularly impacted by the Great Resignation, or just all this other turmoil that's been going on? Besides, I guess we've already talked about the hospitality industry, but there must be other parts of the economy impacted as well.
Yeah, again, healthcare is a place where, there was a lot of intensity, a lot of urgency, a lot of drain of energy. I think we're seeing it in that healthcare space, I think we're seeing it in education as well, as a lot of teachers in particular were dealing with the uncertainty of how schools were going to function, and then dealing in somewhat of an untrained way with how they were going to communicate teaching virtually. It put a lot of stress on them.
What other changes are we seeing in the workforce and the workplace as we go into 2022?
Well, from a workforce perspective, you're going to continue to see the accelerated move toward more sophisticated skill requirements, especially in the tech space. You're going to see a lot of demand for that tech capability. And from an employee perspective, again, I think some people are going to take advantage of the opportunity, learn new skills, change professions, and sort of take a next step in their career that they didn't foresee before COVID.
This is not necessarily a Nashville question, but do you see, you go to places now and people don't want to take your cash money. They want everything to be on credit or done somehow virtually. Is that what's going to happen? We're also going to see, we go to the restaurant and there's not a waiter or a waitress there anymore. We have to go to a kiosk in order, and maybe you go get your own food or somebody brings it to you.
You're going to see a lot of accommodation to artificial intelligence, machine learning. So yes, as the stress of finding workforce increases, people will innovate technologically.
Ralph Schulz is our guest. He's the president and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. We're talking about what happened in 2022 to the Nashville economy and jobs, what may happen in 2022. Back to more conversation after this break.